Grace and peace to you, and good whatever time of the day it is when you are listening to this. You are joining us here at Piecing It Together with Annika and Ben, where we explore peacemaking in this fraught century in which we are living. I, of course, am Ben.
And I am Annika, and we are joined today with two guests doing ministry with some specifically underserved population. First, we have with us Reverend Schaunel Steinnagel. Schaunel is the co-pastor of the Welcome Church, which is an ELCA congregation proclaiming the hope and love of a gracious God to all people. Within the Welcome Church, she is also the leader of The Well, a ministry specifically serving women experiencing homelessness. With us, we also have Reverend Deanna, the pastor of Hagar's Community Church, a ministry for incarcerated individuals at Washington Correction Center for Women. Deanna and Schaunel, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I'll start by just inviting you to tell us in your own words about your ministries, Hagar's and The Well. What are those ministries about? What does your work look like, and what drew you in?
I can start. What The Well is at current all of the ministries of the Welcome Church, which involve outreach and support and community building with and among women who come from a range of backgrounds, including women who are currently experiencing homelessness and who have experienced homelessness at prior times in their lives, and people who and many wonderful people who come alongside us as friends and supporters and different folks. The Well originally took on its name from the John 4 gospel passage, where obviously Jesus meets a woman and has a transformative conversation with her, and also the setting of a well, both in the Bible and in real life, in many modern contexts still, as both a place of, where people need to go for both physical nourishment, to get water, to do so many needed tasks, and basic care, and also the well is a place of social meeting, again, both in many ages and today. The Well was originally founded as a shelter for women by the Welcome Church, which is a congregation made up of people experiencing homelessness in Philadelphia, in 2016, when it just was evident that there were a number of women who were a part of the Welcome Church, who were part of the community, who didn't have a place to go where they felt safe to go inside, even in the harshest times of the winter. That there was one shelter that is for women operated by the city that we hear a lot of different kinds of things about, just whatever, but and there was the other main thing that was being offered for people, as far as, and I will always salute it as as an innovative and good thing, but just that more solutions, or you always need a diversity of solutions for a diversity of people. There was a ministry in Philadelphia running an extensive overnight cafe where basically anyone could come in to have a space to be overnight, and it wasn't technically a shelter, so there weren't beds, so that worked for certain people, but for women who were going to feel uncomfortable in a large group of people and then a large co-ed group of people, it wasn't working. So you had people who were remaining outside, that always by choice language, which is a loaded set of language, but because just they did not seem to have an option that fit them. And the Welcome Church, met with our women and asked them kind of if you could design a shelter, what would you want to see? And some emphases were a smaller location, like we came upon a limit of 12 people at a time, and the ability to leave some of your belongings there during the day, having lockers or foot lockers or whatever, and the ability also always an emphasis. I think a lot of things the Welcome Church does, and the women have always sort of keep asking for always is the ability to share food together, the ability to cook for ourselves and share food together. So we were able to get some grants and in February of 2016 open a shelter, which was the Well, and that was located at first at one Episcopal church, which then closed, and then that was started being the next year being located at a certain Presbyterian church, which has now just closed now as of just about a year ago or within the past year. But we got into partnership with Bethesda Project, which is a wonderful agency working with people experiencing homelessness in Philadelphia, to provide staffing for the Well. And the city, based on the two wonderful successes of the Well within the first couple of years, which were the women, first people who would sort of been labeled as shelter resistant, showing up, being consistent, coming into a shelter. And then in the second year, having like 3/4 of the women move into permanent housing coming after a winter season. So the first 2 seasons were winter only. And the city said, wow, these successes are so impressive. We will pay for the staffing if the Well opens year round. So that's been from November of 2017 until within 2024, the Well operated as a year-round shelter. 2 things happened in 2024 right about the same time. This congregation came to its end, and the building was being judged unsafe by the presbytery, and the city said, we're not going to fund this. We're going to cut down. The Office of Homeless Services has been under immense pressure to cut their budget in various ways, and that was one of the things that got cut. So those things happened sort of at the same time. So the Well ceased to be as a shelter, but I would say at that point, the Welcome Church pastoral staff made the conscious choice to say, well, how can we define the Well in the absence of a physical location? And we have always had like 2 women's groups that meet regularly. So just really attending to the 2 women's groups, again, gathering the women, both, women who are both still experiencing homelessness and women who are graduates of the Well who've gone on to be, doing different things and living in permanent housing and remaining as leaders in the Welcome Church, gathering people together and saying, what would you look for in a location if we're looking for a new location? What would be things we're looking for, which we continue to do, but really gathering the women, continue to organize with them, paying special attention, which we always have, but to women who are on the streets. When we gather, we worship on the Parkway on the first and last Sunday of every month on the Ben Franklin Parkway. So paying attention to people who might be more reticent to seek services or whatnot. So the Well is currently the breadth of outreach and support that the Welcome Church provides to women in whether there is a shelter available or not.
So, Deanna, you work with another at-risk but very different population.
Yeah, although a lot of my folks that I work with have experienced homelessness as well in their stories as part of their lives. So I serve as pastor of Hagar's Community Church. It was founded by a group of passionate Presbyterians around 2016 through a 1001 New Worshiping Communities grant. And Hagar's was launched using a model that the Lutherans actually developed and Prison Congregations of America holds and is our partner. And it's a model that designs church plants inside prisons. So a lot of prison ministries have pastors or volunteers that serve, excuse me, pardon me. A lot of prison ministries have pastors or volunteers that serve outside congregations primarily, and then come in occasionally, maybe monthly, maybe weekly, depending on the ministry, to serve inside the prison. the PCA model is to plant the church with a full-time parish pastor inside the prison. So Hagar's community church is my congregation, and I serve them full-time. Our church is named for Hagar in Genesis, who had an encounter with God in the wilderness, and is the one in Scripture who boldly gave God a name and said, "You are the God who sees me." And so she's sort of our patron saint of sorts to remind all of us who attend, volunteers and congregants alike, that God is a God who sees, and there is no place that God isn't, and we are all beloved. And so we come together for worship, we come together for Bible study, for other sorts of pastoral care opportunities, and create beloved community inside the largest women's prison in Washington state. I was stumbled into this work. Prison ministry was not necessarily on my radar when I was in seminary, but I've always been drawn both to women and women's spirituality in particular, and to folks on the margins. And so when this opportunity, when the pastoral nominating committee job description came my way, it felt like the right fit at the right time. And I've been really grateful to get to do this work since they called me in 2023. So prison ministry was not necessarily my initial call. Not necessarily on my radar in seminary or anything, but I have always been drawn to women's ministry, in particular women's spirituality, and also folks on the margins. And so it's this Hagar's Community Church is a real blending of those two passions of mine. And when the job description came across my desk as I was looking for a call, it felt like this might be a great fit, and it has been. And I have really, really loved working with this community since they called me to serve in 2023.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking of as you were both talking is you both work with populations of folks, right, that have very complicated relationships with the world around them. And so, before becoming a minister, I worked with folks who have disabilities for years. The first thing I had to do in order to do that, right, was to get rid of my own stigma, right, my own sense of judgment, right, my own sort of stereotypes about these folks. So, I mean, to date, as of now, I have zero left, right? I understand people with disabilities as human beings that are individuals, and and all that good stuff, And I mean, I was dealing mostly with intellectual disabilities, which is highly stigmatized, right? So I guess my question is, did you have that hurdle? And how do you deal with it?
I'd say for me in prison ministry, I was a little less of a hurdle, a shorter hurdle maybe, because my family spent a number of years as licensed foster parents. And
Mm,
so we had navigated working with folks in trauma, in addiction, in poverty, in that space. And so my eyes had really been opened, and God had given me a heart of compassion, particularly for the birth parents that we were supporting as we cared for their kids. But prison was a new space for me. And so I had some trepidation, and I was honest about that with the nominating team and the call team. Um, and what would that look like, and how would that feel, and would it be a scary place to be? And those fears were quickly abated my first time inside prison. And I think a lot of that is because the folks that come to Hagar's Community Church are people that are seeking something.
mm,
For, I would say, 85% of the folks that come to our programming are in a space where they're looking to make a change in their lives, and they're thinking that spirituality, a relationship with the divine, might be a tool for them in making a change and a transformation. And so they are open, they are honest, and they are kind, and they're generous. Um, and we have developed wonderful mutual trusting relationships across our community. So I feel even more protective of them. And when I'm seeking volunteers and recruiting folks, sometimes people will express their own fears to me, about this population, and I feel very protective. And there is nothing to be afraid of any of these wonderful humans that are at our church.
So I'm glad Deanna went first, probably because it gave me longer to do a life assessment. Because at first I'd be like, oh no. So
Prejudices, yeah.
in the broadest strokes, I will say that there would have been a period in my life when I would have been more, narrowly understanding ministry as there's people who have things, and what's the best way to get those things to the people who don't have them, which is you know uh, in that in the way I'm trying to say that, a very one-sided view of ministry. I've for a very long time, and it's definitely what led me into working with the Welcome Church, had great concerns about economic division in the world, and really feeling that's the number one thing that I feel called to, that you know brings me into places of ministry and Bible interpretation. I would say, if I had any of those remaining feelings about a one-sided view of ministry, I'm not sure how quickly those dissipated in my life at various points. But the work with the Welcome Church, as inclusively, which includes the work with the Well, would rapidly cause that to change, in that people just, if there's a stereotype that people on the street are only there to get things from you, or whatever that stereotype would be. I know so many people who have such incredible, wonderful gifts, and who are such wonderful bringers of gifts, in both in the sort of the tangible sense, and many intangible examples to the greater community. And it's definitely true in the most pragmatic sense, that no one can survive out on the streets alone, that a community builds. And so people are sharing. I'll say, just the other day on President's Day, my 15-year-old son came in to work with me, and I guess, he's 15. He hadn't taken a razor to his face recently, so maybe he looked a little, you
Some
know,
scruffier.
a little scruffier. And one of the men really thought he must be some young man who needed some additional care, and offered him a pair of sneakers. I mean, so he is a new member to our community who immediately needs to be welcome in, and and have his most, so he's not walking out with insufficient shoes. That need met. Um, that's sort of a funny and immediate example, but the leadership is shared. Um, People give greatly of themselves. It's and the wonderful return of people after the COVID pandemic, which, caused obviously everything to shift and reformulate in different ways. I mean, slightly differently for the Welcome Church, but yet definitely true for the Welcome Church. And when we started, if had been a gap of the times we gathered, when we started gathering in person again, it was, there was still slowness, which I think still continues. Like, we will see people we haven't seen in a long time sort of reappear sometimes. But just that, the sense that the community is a part of each person, they want to come back. We're all part of a whole that we're trying to form, even as we struggle against many different kinds of things going on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Schaunel. Something that you said sort of sparked in me. There seems to be, I think, this misunderstanding when it comes to prison ministry, that like the staff, the pastor, or the volunteers are bringing Jesus with us when we come into these places. Um, and so I'm constantly fighting against that notion, because Jesus is there. Jesus and the gospel are alive and at work throughout the prison. And I can imagine in the same way in the lives of the folks that you work with, Schaunel. And so we all get to encounter Jesus together. There's nothing that I'm necessarily bringing Jesus with me. Like, we all get to experience and encounter Jesus, and all be transformed by the gospel and by the grace of our loving God. So
I
yeah,
think that's
there's
a
no
common,
hierarchy. Yeah.
yeah, common misconception that ministers like us walk around with Jesus in a little pouch, right? And we bring him wherever we go.
A pocket,
When
a
we
pocket.
leave, he's not there, so it's okay to do bad stuff because he's not watching anymore. Right? Like,
Right. And also there's also the assumption that Jesus lives in the pockets of the housed ministers, and not
right.
the apostles writing prison letters, and not the people on the street. Because I don't know, if you check the notes, if you check the gospels, Jesus is much more frequently, I think, with the imprisoned and with the poor
Yeah.
and
Jesus is
houseless.
more
Yeah.
likely to be in the prison than outside the prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be
Just
honest,
like I
even
mean,
like,
homeless ministry, same thing. Yeah.
as someone that has been in many outside churches, I find this to be very true. Like, the gospel is alive in prison in a way that many of our sacred spaces I don't find him as easily. And I think part of that is because folks in prison need the gospel to be true to get out of bed.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and many of us regular outside privileged folks don't.
I mean, I'll
So
say that many people will testify in ways that obviously I don't go around doing on a daily basis, like that God took care of me today. God, I had something to eat today. I was hungry. I said a prayer and I encountered, an unexpected turn in my life. Um, that that's not a language I have ever, really been one would use, and probably don't plan to, don't know a context when I would feel that to be what I would say. And very much so, this, deep faith among the people. We're definitely not meeting people who are, in some lost state in that sense and need to have faith introduced to them. One of my
Yeah.
favorite stories is about a woman who has been in housing for, a good 13 years now, I think, but had been homeless likely as many years before that. And she makes a regular practice, when the well was physically existing, of making, contributions, having me come by and pick things up, like where that would be useful for the well. And once I was, at loading her stuff into my car, and, just thanking her for doing this, because it just seems so remarkable to me that anyone would, that feel that motivated to give. And she expressed that she feels a risk of slipping back, into, like, any choices that she made at other times in her life, and when she was living on the streets, and the risk of forgetting what she, having if she forgets where she came from, she might more likely slip back in. And and maintaining the relationship with the women is that important, to remember where she came from, and that she's not that far from that condition. It was just
Hmm.
amazing to me that that it's that the community is that strong, and the non-physical bounds between people are that strong, and people are motivated by that, by the need to care for one another.
Schaunel, I'm curious too, especially as you mentioned part of the history of the well was specifically reaching out to folks who, I'm trying to remember the language you used. You described as like shelter resistant, or not as likely to take up space in a shelter. And I know from some of my own ministerial experience, one of the toughest parts of ministry with folks experiencing homelessness is it's tough to know where people are at any given moment. It's tough to track people down, and I'm curious, how does your community gather? How do you do outreach? How do people know when and where to meet? Because it would be very different than outreach to, say, folks with email inboxes and addresses that you're sending communication to.
So I think consistency, and if you say you're going to be somewhere, you show up no matter what, are the sort of two of the main rules that help um, maintain those bounds. So that no matter what the weather is, we will be at the inside and or outside location we have promised to be at, um, on a, no matter what. And sometimes people who are on the streets may also be there, and sometimes they may not be there, or they may be not, be there or not there in stronger or less strong numbers. But
Mhm.
but that consistency, and if you say you're going to show up, is the only, I think, the key part. I mean, we also, you can post things on Facebook and things, which is, and word of mouth. People have amazing communication methods that are beyond my understanding, that things just do get communicated amazingly, like without any clear, telephone tray. But at this, the part we play in it is showing up when we say we're going to show up, and having relationships be grounded in that.
Yeah, Deanna, I was also thinking, I think sometimes we forget that the Presbyterian Church is actually quite involved in prison ministry, like as a general principle. I mean, I think a lot of presbyteries have some kind of, outreach in that way. And so it's not, I guess the interesting thing about what you're doing, right, is that it's not new, but it's new. And so, like it's not new in the sense that I think prison ministry is kind of a Matthew 25 concept, right? We understand that it's important, or at least some of us do.
Sure.
I think the idea, though, of actually establishing a church within the walls of a prison, right, is remarkable. And so, are you the only one doing that right now? Like, or is that gonna? Do you think that's going to be the new thing? I mean, because to your earlier point, right, a lot of folks have gone into prison with less than admirable evangelistic motives, right? Sort of Christendom behind bars. And so, to actually establishing a worshiping community, right, inside a prison, um, seems like a very progressive way to now reinvigorate a ministry that's been around for a while.
Yes, I would love to see every presbytery have a prison congregation as part of their roster. We at Hagar's Community Church are the only Presbyterian church that's a member of Prison Congregations of America.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so there is
Wow. Yeah.
there is room, absolutely, for more Presbyterian congregations. In Washington State, we have a Hagar's Community Church at WCCW, and then at a facility called Washington Correction Center. It's a men's facility. There is a Lutheran congregation called Living Stones. And I believe those are the only two prison congregations here in Washington that I know of. So the the model is really beautiful and really powerful, but it needs outside congregational support, right? So my congregation will never be able to sustain a full-time pastor. So part of my call is a missional call. So I spend a lot of Sunday mornings like a missionary preaching and sharing about our community and raising support and seeking church and individual donors for our ministry so that we can continue. And my team, I have a guide team that helps and supports our ministry, so as a board, and they are looking at potentially launching a Hager's type congregation at the smaller women's facility here in Washington as well. So there is movement and excitement in our Olympia Presbytery to launch a second congregation. There's excitement for me and other PCA. The executive director is happy to mentor anybody who is interested in looking at what it would look like to launch a prison congregation in your area.
And I just want to just dig at one more thing, and that is my understanding of prison ministry right now, based on what I've experienced. I'm in a prison town.
Okay.
We have an enormous prison here. And so there are prison ministries, but my understanding is they basically go in and do Bible study once a week. That's kind of their thing. How are you different?
So yeah, a lot of prison ministries will come in and do a Bible study, or they'll put on a worship service, or quite a few are involved in like reentry preparation. So like life skills or things. Some prison ministries, churches will come in and do those kinds of services. So we are different because I am their pastor full time. So we do service. We have a Sunday service, and one of the things that we've had in the past, and COVID sort of took away, and we're working to rebuild, is um, an inside leadership council sorts, so that we are raising up Indigenous leaders that are helping plan services and be a part of our ministry as well. And so it's not, once again, not just me and the volunteers coming in and doing it, but we are our church community, and that there is an amount of time and a length of time that we spend together building community. So I'm not just coming in and preaching and leaving, but we have time built into our services where we're sitting in circles and we're discussing the sermon and we're discussing the text, and then we're sharing prayers and whatnot. And then it's like our inside version of a midweek small group maybe. And so we're sharing life together. And so for me, I come outside and I write all the prayer requests I heard in my journal. I encourage our volunteers to do the same. And then when you come back the next week or in a few weeks, depending on how often you volunteer, follow up with people and say, I've been praying for your mom, and how is she doing? And how is your sister? Is she turned up again? And really build a community. So it's not just us coming and putting on a service and trying to get people saved, but we are creating beloved community inside the prison. And that's part of our peacemaking efforts, to circle around to peacemaking. There is a lot of turmoil and strife and pain and suffering in prisons. And so if we can gather in a space for a couple hours of peace and a belonging, that ripples out. And staff tells me that. They tell me, like, folks that come to your services, when they are back in their cells with their roommates and doing their thing, there's a different energy. And so the ripples from when we gather out to the outer facility are a big part of our peacemaking.
I'm in love with what you do. That's all I'm going to say.
Come visit anytime.
Yeah.
And my husband has done prison ministry off and on, and so we've always kind of had a little toe in there. But I've got some people to talk to that will want to talk to you.
Brilliant. I'm more than happy to connect with anybody that is inspired.
Connections, connective church, folks. This is how we do it.
Yep.
Yeah, and when outside churches are connected to our inside church, like it's mutual. Like it's always mutual. And so outside churches that serve, whether it be in reentry or they bring teams of volunteers in or whatnot, it reminds us all that we're human. And I continue to be surprised how many people actually have been touched by incarceration. Many in our churches have, and they aren't able to share vulnerably about that. So when this relationship with folks at Hagar's Community Church has allowed people to share and be honest and open about their own stories.
That's really interesting. And I was thinking, with Hagar's Community Church and the Well, part of the reason I think we wanted to bring the two of you into this conversation together is there's an overlap between incarcerated populations and homeless populations, because so much of poverty and homelessness is criminalized, and having a criminal record makes it so hard to access things like housing that we we were figuring, there's going to be some shared needs and some shared relevance. One that I have picked up on in both the spaces you serve is a creating a sense of mutual community as opposed to like top down. I'm bringing something into the prison. I am bringing a resource to the folks experiencing homelessness. Less that and much more like, hey, this is a shared space. This is a shared community. Um, that's something I've picked up on in this conversation, but I'm curious to hear from the two of you. What similarities do you see in the ministries that you're doing in two different fields and on two different sides of the country, but also not totally separate?
So the leadership is definitely something that has both naturally occurred, I would say, or or just is, and at the same time we find ways to look to cultivate leadership. We have a woman who is a graduate of the Well Shelter who actually moved into her place um, in March of 2020, like right before the shutdown of all things, who took on her own to taking an online theological studies course, which um, may come from a more conservative place, whatever, the folks who put that on. But she is, both very much enjoys the opportunity to be involved in that study and is also very much open to questioning and being in conversation around conservative thoughts and being in, a more open conversation. And we referred her to, just this past year, the Presbytery of Philadelphia started a preaching a lay like a an opportunity for elders to have additional training to be able to be preachers either in their own congregations or in other congregations, and we referred her to be a part of that, and that will be a year coming to an end in like May this year. We have she and another woman who again is a graduate of the Well, who is also a trained opera singer, um, and two men who are all now regular leading Bible study on a haphazard rotation schedule with us because myself and Violet Little, who's the other pastor of the Welcome Church, figure we should get in there sometimes too, which makes rotation a bumpy thing if you have that many people trying to get in and out of it. But definitely, sort of like what makes a congregation, which Deanna was speaking a little bit on. I mean, I think obviously a chaplaincy model speaks more to a person coming in and, discerning needs and helping to provide support as the person needs it, and hearing a person, helping to sort out what listen actively to what a person is saying and stuff. But the congregation model has more of a sense of presence and community building. The person isn't just coming in and then going on. That it's the person who's the pastor. It's a presence that's being built. And but then I think right up there, leadership. Building leadership, having leaders who are the leaders of the community is sort of a mark of a congregation. I always, will sort of add in the slight, joke but true statement that a women's group is a hallmark of a congregation. And so that's been a focus of the Welcome Church, just that women are, both, outnumbered by men on the streets, and then correspondingly, there's some
Sure.
fewer service available to them, so a more vulnerable population. So I think those, they're looking at who are the most vulnerable people and accepting people's gifts and finding the way forward together are all kind of potentially shared. areas of overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think some overlap is the reality that we are all products of our circumstances in a lot of ways. So me, Pastor Deanna, very privileged to have a solid home to grow up in, secure attachment style, right? My parents were loving and attentive and sober and kind. And a lot of folks that are in prison, that are incarcerated, that are homeless, that are addicted, what struggling with addiction, those didn't have those solid homes, didn't have a stable parent. Many folks that I work with, talk about their parents that are still active in their addiction. We pray regularly for parents active in their own addictions. And so these cycles, generational trauma cycles that folks don't have the skill set, the knowledge, the understanding of how to break out of. They've only been given the tools that they've been given, right? If all I've ever seen to manage conflict is to use my fists, that's all I know how to do. If all I ever know in my home is when I have big feelings, to get angry and don't know how to navigate disappointment or failure or frustration in my life, right? So that I think probably is very similar to the stories that Schaunel and her church encounters is folks that are products of their circumstances, and helping to break those generational cycles is part of the work that we do.
I kind of imagine one of the other sort of overlaps, like when we work with folks with disabilities, we talk a lot about comorbidity, right? There's often a comorbid thing, right? So it's not unusual for somebody with an intellectual disability to have obsessive compulsive disorder, or to struggle with depression or anxiety, or those kinds of things. And so I would suspect, right, you're in two populations where you're dealing with a multitude of complexities, right? And so there's the mental health, right, complexity, because none of these folks are living in environments conducive to good mental health, right? And so there's the mental health aspect of it. There's the addiction, right, which we've kind of talked about, sort of addictive issues. How do you navigate being pastors, psychiatrists, and drug counselors, right? I mean, you're doing a lot, right? And you're all, and also career counseling in some cases, right? Because people want to move into better worlds, right? And so, because I can remember what it was like to wear so many hats, and just feel completely overwhelmed, right, by this need to make sure everybody was okay. And so, how do you navigate all of that stuff sort of coming at once?
Not
Well, I
well.
mean,
Do you, maybe you question, do you?
Yeah, I guess I should have
Like
said
every
that.
day I'm like, oh my gosh, I need more
Are you
trauma.
okay? Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, this is outside of my wheelhouse. I did not get enough in seminary to navigate some of these things. So,
Yeah.
by
Oh,
the grace of God, skin of my teeth, and finding really good partners. Yeah.
I would say, understanding what I've been trained to do, which is hopefully to be a pastor, which is a lot about presence and listening, and bringing the skills which I bring, which is a lot of Bible study. I think any engagement in this with the scriptures in the Welcome Church is, both when we worship together outside on the Ben Franklin Parkway and in our Bible studies, is an amazing experience, and people are bringing any number of viewpoints, but have so having someone potentially who can help to give structure to that or whatnot is certainly helpful, but that's secondary to listening and opening space and providing presence with people, and certainly knowing if somebody says they would like to get into they want to get into drug treatment and whatever, knowing what might be a good phone call to start that kind of conversation, but definitely not stepping outside my lane and presuming that I know anything about that other than that I'm a presence in somebody's life.
Gotcha. So kind of just clarity, real clarity of role and knowing who are your resource
Yes.
partners. Yeah.
Yes.
I on a similar vein, as I'm thinking about my experiences in medical chaplaincy, y'all have already kind of pointed out some of the overlap in terms of ministry of presence. And I, Ben, as you're talking about all these hats, as someone who has also found myself having to wear lots of hats, like the moral injury of it all is real too. I think I have found myself struggling before with being with somebody who has needs so much bigger than I can serve, and having to walk away, and having to walk away knowing that not everything is being solved today, and then not knowing if everything will be solved at all, period. I'm curious, do the two of you grapple with that? How do you grapple with that? How do you stay human and care for
The
yourselves and the
needs
people
are so
involved?
much more than there's our resources. And to Schaunel's point, like I can't fix. There's so much I can't fix, and I shouldn't, because I'm not the white savior just to swoop in and try and fix these things, right? So listening and lamenting and holding the grief and whatnot is a lot of what we do, because there is so much that we can't fix. So, for example, at WCCW, there are recovery support services available, but they are prioritized for the folks that are releasing soon. So I have a woman in my congregation who has a 15-year sentence and would like to be sober, and is trying to get sober, and would like these recovery services to help her. But because her sentence is so long, she is at the bottom of the list. But she is like, I need help, because to live here for the next 15 years, I need help. And I can't solve that. I can't fix that for her. I can't swoop in and be her drug counselor, because I'm not trained in that. So I just have to be angry with her and grieve with her and say, this is wrong. And then if spaces and time allow, there could be some maybe outside advocacy, and the work that we do. Part of the work that we do is try to advocate as we can. So if bills are before Congress, or calling up our local legislators and encourage them to increase funding for mental health counseling inside. But there isn't a lot that you can do. And so there is, and the stories and the trauma stories that you hear, the hurt, the heartbreak, the brokenness, there's a lot to hold that is really painful, and the injustice is great, and is deep, and is profound.
Well, I think you make a really important point, because I think it's so easy, right, to be the patronizing force of good, that goes in and imposes what is the correct answer, right? Like, I mean, Annika and I both come from chaplaincy backgrounds also. Like, I'm a hospice chaplain, right? So I go in at the worst possible moment. Like, I'm an on-call hospice chaplain. Someone's dead if you call me, right? And so to walk into that, families are complex right after death, and so I've broken up many a fist fight, right, in my chaplain days. And so could I go in there and impose order because I wear a certain authority as the minister walking in the room? Absolutely. Is it my place to do that? It is not. Because I am not there for that purpose, right? I am here to help facilitate the healing of the family and to get you through the ritualistic pieces of death, right? And so, but the urge is always, right, just to stop the damage, right? Just to be quiet, like just to make it stop. And so I it's really important that we remind ourselves that it is not our job to rescue everyone. We're not rescuers, right? That's really not what we are. We are support systems,
That's
right?
God's
We
job.
are right. We're not heroes. We're helpers, servants, right? And so I'm just glad you talked about that, because I mean, mission always goes sideways, right? The minute it becomes an exercise of privilege. And this, we have stuff we can give you, right? And so I have to imagine for both of you, not, I mean, you both seem pretty down to earth about what you're doing. But there's got to be a constant sort of struggle with that need to like. I mean, the story you just told, right, of the woman who wants to be sober, that is excruciatingly heartbreaking to think about. That we are part of a system that is keeping her addicted. And so, you know, one of the questions I ask our guests a lot, right, is how are you caring for you, right? I mean, how do you spiritually care for yourselves, you know, while you're doing this work?
That's a good and
Well,
important question. Go
yeah,
for it, Sean.
I don't know. I don't know. I'll go backwards and answer some other question earlier, and maybe I'll speak on
And
that.
maybe we'll find
Um,
the answer. Yeah.
Just say whatever. Yeah,
um,
Yeah.
I once, quite a while ago, but probably not that long ago, somebody who I'm sure was a church person literally said to me, like, you must have the most depressing job there is. And by that, I really, what I understood them to say at the time was, because you're going out and meeting with people who are experiencing homelessness, and that's such a hopeless state of being, and there's no change in these people's lives. I mean, those were all the assumptions that person is making, and it's really like, you don't know the people. This is just this vibrant community of people who are always bringing gifts, as I said before. But at the same time, there is, the flip side of making that, retort, is that there is a very heartbreaking aspect of knowing that there are these wonderful people who are, for, obviously a complexity of reasons, some of which, some of which should be pretty easy to, some of which would be harder to address, but some of which you can make a little, like, why is it so hard to have more affordable housing? Why is it, like, things that should be sort of easy questions. Why don't we shave off why are we even talking about cutting SNAP benefits or whatever? The things that would be easy solutions that become even, hard problems as well. It's heartbreaking to know that I leave a community and go home to my house, and I leave a group of people who are on the street, and we are somewhat bound together, and that definitely, I would think, I'm sure, motivates me to advocate for people, to continue to advocate for, like, what to me, what seems to be, like, obvious, straightforward solutions to problems that can be addressed in policy ways. Where
I
the
forgot that.
city of
Yeah.
Philadelphia is a frustrating place right now on a lot of fronts. And so yeah, so that I wanted to acknowledge the someone telling me it was the most depressing thing, which is definitely the opposite of the case. Yet the heartbreaking aspect, which could be, you could call that depressing, of knowing that there are people who are on the streets, who are, now that I know them, I know they're good people. Like, what did I know before? But that's even worse, that they're still there, and I know them. Yeah.
Yeah. There's the tragedy of just the systemicness of it all. That these are standing ministries because there's a standing need. But Schaunel, as you're talking about having someone tell you must have a depressing job, I'm laughing a little because I've also gotten that when I was working with as a chaplain in the medical field with spinal cord injury survivors. Like, there's this assumption that it's all doom and gloom, and it is heavy just being up against that kind of need and that kind of loss. But I did not experience that position as a depressing one. I experienced it as really moving and energizing, because the flip side of the grief and the sense of overwhelm was also getting to see breakthroughs, right? Getting to see families rally and getting to see people heal and tap into very literal physical as well as mental and emotional and spiritual strength, um, to achieve progress and achieve healings and achieve a new way of living and being. And I'm curious, in addition to the really tough parts of being in deep community with folks in need, like what are the assets, what are the resources that you see unique to the people you serve? I've heard, Schaunel, you named this intense, uh nuanced communication network with folks experiencing homelessness as one, but yet what else do these communities have going for them that it would be easy for those of us with more privilege to overlook?
Well, I think to answer both of your questions kind of in one, for me, there is a lot of joy in this work. Like there's a lot of hard, but to your point, Annika, there is a lot of joy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of laughter. The resilience of folks in my community is power. They're powerful examples to me. The hope that is spoken. I've been reading some reflections of Walter Brueggemann on hope, and he talks about like really the only folks that can really speak of hope are oppressed peoples, right? Because everyone else is pretty much status quo keepers.
Yeah,
But
because when you're oppressed, you've seen it. You've seen the
you've seen it,
breakthroughs.
and you once again you need it to get up and to live your life and to see the possibilities of something different and to hold out hope for that. So the joy, the laughter, the hope is like tangible sometimes.
Yeah.
It's a gritty faith, it's a hard fought faith. And these folks are such deep examples to me. Um, and so there is a lot of joy alongside the pain. And we practice gratitude together regularly. You know, we sit in a circle and what are you thankful for today? What's something we name it. And there's always something to be thankful for, even in prison. And people speak that and remind me of that.
Well, I think it's
Also, very
important.
thankful for the support. If you're looking at starting a prison ministry, my employment package includes funds for therapy.
Mm.
So make sure.
Hey, yeah.
I would say every church should probably do that, but this in particular, I'm really grateful for some leadership that put that together for me. So I have great support in that way too.
Well, I think sometimes it's important, like happy and sad, right, are kind of black and white perspectives. I get told
Yeah.
you say you're a hospice chaplain, right, and people think you weep constantly, right? And so, one of the things I end up explaining to folks is there is a sacredness in wilderness places, right? There is a sacredness in these moments where people are experiencing the true depth of life, right? And so for me, there is nothing but beauty in being invited into that space, right? And being asked to be the one that helps, walk somebody through that moment. And so, yes, we're all ministers. We hear sad stories all the time. But I think maybe I'm projecting, but I tend to think of things not in terms of happy and sad, but of things that give life and take life, right? Things that are, light and not so light, right? I don't really think about it as sadness and happiness, as much as I just see it as kind of a sacredness, that doesn't need those words, because it's something deeper than that. So, I mean, I admire the fact, frankly, that both of you are willing to sit, and hear, I'm sure, devastating things, right? And carry that with you. And we're ministers. I mean, we know things that we'll never tell anyone ever.
Mm.
And so we don't always have the outlet, right, to sort of let that stuff out. Um, but I think it's important to stop. Ministry is not a happy, sad prospect. Yeah, it's a service, life-giving prospect, right? That's kind of what we're doing. So I don't know why I said that. It's a random thought, I guess. But I think, I never meet people doing the kind of work that you're doing or that Annika's doing who are miserable people. Like, it's just not the case. Like, every person I've ever met who is truly serving people, right, for the right reasons, does so joyfully, right? Even when it sucks, right? They still do it. I think I have a lot of aunts who are nurses, right?
Mm.
Nurses put up with a lot of crap that most of us would not deal with for 5 minutes, right? And so to be a nurse for 40 years, you got to love people to do that, right? You have to have a real sense of service to do that. And so, I think sometimes people think we, I don't know how to say this. I guess we're abnormal. People think we have the same reactions everybody else does, right? But the reality is that the spiritual perspective is different, especially when you're in these places, right?
Mhm.
Because it takes a lot of effort to not want to help, and it takes a lot of effort not want to control, right? To accept that it's not yours. Um, so I think, yeah, I think people working in some of the most sort of, I guess, quote unquote, dark places are some of the most joyful warriors I've ever met.
I think to get in my plug of the use of the word peacemaking is would just reaching across chasms of society and finding ways to build relationship and see the chasms as not, and finding ways to decrease those chasms. I think that, the concept of homelessness involves a lot of stereotypes for people, and
Mhm.
when you meet people you realize that um, a lot of people have wonderful gifts, and when you give them opportunities to share those gifts, they thrive in different leadership capacities. And I think helping other people to and other churches to, to have opportunities to enter this journey in different places is a work of peacemaking, because it helps to people to meet one another. We ask youth groups to come out and
Mm.
host coffee hour on the parkway with us. They have conversations with people who are experiencing homelessness for, in a context which I don't know that they might have another opportunity to do that. um Hopefully, again, that transforms. One transformation that is in people's lives is to go and say, well, if this person is not some aberration of a person like I must have assumed they were, then what is an incumbent on me to go on further and heal this rift, to provide opportunities for places where there's homelessness, to that to be to for more opportunities to exist for people to have access to. um I think that's where I see, calling people, both engaging in peacemaking myself, building relationships, and calling people into peacemaking, um, to join that work and to not see people as, again, some stereotype of whatever the the worst extreme of. I mean, sort of, you could, these are funny words you can put in there, sort of, the worst extreme of sluggishness or whatever kind of thing people come up with, that people that is just patently inaccurate,
Mm.
and again, becomes quickly not true if you speak to someone, but I could see where it could appear to be true if you don't speak to someone. So breaking down those walls between people is, I think, key to the ministry.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
that's
I think you're right. I think there's like the really deep joy and the really deep accountability and like conviction is in that relationship, that connection. Um and and yeah, that recognition that, guess what, you are not walking as the minister with Jesus in your pocket. Like, Jesus is already there, and actually so are many other points of connection. Um
I find myself asking outside people like to reflect um, on what would it be like to live in a place where every day you are defined by your worst day or your worst mistake.
Eesh.
and
Yeah.
then and then so the work that we do is to create a space for a couple hours a week where that is not the case.
Gotcha.
Yeah, when you said that, I mean, that kind of punches you in the gut to think about it. But because the institution is built on that principle,
Absolutely.
right, of reminding you what you did wrong all the time. And I think, we have an entire psychiatric industry that's built on us doing that to ourselves. And so now we have an industry that's doing it to people on purpose, right? It's this whole kind of institution. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I guess I had a friend who was a prison therapist. Um, and I asked her once, this must be terrifying, right? Like this thing you go in and talk to people about this. And she said, you know what? She said, no. She said, the environment is scary. I'm not going to lie. It's built to be scary. She said, but the people are just humans. And they're the same, right? Everywhere. And so, sometimes you can let the environment dictate how you feel about the people. And the environment is literally designed to make you think these people are dangerous and scary.
Wow, that's really powerful.
Yeah. And I think you're onto something. I'm trying to find the words. We'll see if I succeed or not. But
This is what happens when we get
but
off script. Yeah.
I know, but it's uh no, Ben, when you mentioned kind of sharing your story about folks assuming that hospice chaplaincy must just be like, oh, so dour. Um and I mean, I definitely like, I think yes, I can relate to that projection of other people's assumptions about what it's like to work in an intense space. And I think I saw Deanna and Schaunel similarly kind of like be like, yep. And you mentioned you weren't sure why you brought it up, but I think I might know why. I think there's some solidarity to be found. Like, I really enjoy talking to other chaplains who really find deep, deep joy in their work, because it does feel like I'm talking to people who like, oh, you get it. You get it. It's not all doom and gloom. It's a lot of really deep kind of a sense of what you're doing matters to somebody, and matters beyond your bubble. Um and I'm thinking about how prevalent that all four of us working in with folks with disabilities, with folks experiencing homelessness, with folks who are incarcerated, have experienced the assumption that that just must be an awful situation without a recognition of how much connection, how much humanity, and how much resources do in fact exist. Um, and I don't know what the grand takeaway is there, but I think there's definitely something about like the siloing of it all, the way in which
Mm.
you are cut off from resources. If you're not able bodied, you're not with a squeaky clean criminal record, you don't have access to housing or the money to stay housed, whatever. Like, the peacemaking in this accompany work is recognizing that, like, no, these are all, we have a shared human experience across these boards. And also like that these spaces aren't a damnation, that you're not just damned to not having a human experience, not having a spiritual connection. um and yeah, I don't know, I'm wondering if there's some, my words are not coming together today, I'm so sorry to our
No,
listeners, but
I think you're actually like, no, I think what you're saying, it actually makes a lot of sense. And I think the part of it, and not that it actually, you always make sense, Annika. You're hard on yourself.
that's
But
not true.
anyway, so, no,
um
because what I was thinking of, was there is that sense, right? That shared sense of um, ministry is a very lonely profession. And I don't mean that in a negative way all the time. But what I mean is, as I said before, right, we just carry stuff that no one else gets to carry. We hear things that no one else gets to hear. We are, the vessels of confession for some people, the vessels of, sorrow for others, and so we become, we're constant, we're always kind of taking on stuff, right? But we don't have the permission even to use our relationships, um, to be completely candid, because some things we can never be candid about, right? And so it can feel very lonely, right? Um, or to be the only person who doesn't think your job is a sad nightmare, right? I mean, like, I mean, that's a lonely idea. And there's just, I think, a part of people who do work like this, that is so driven from a spiritual place that is almost incomprehensible to us, right? That it's so deep in us,
Mhm.
that it is literally what I believe to be sort of the energy of creation that God put in us, right? Which is to heal and help and be connected, right? And to do those things. And so that's what makes it sacred, right? I mean, it's easy to focus on the suffering, it's easy to focus on the sadness. It's easy to focus, and we could look. I could run around, being all self-pitying about my sad job, and everybody should feel bad for me because it's so hard. Nothing's happening to me. Somebody else's family is dying, right? Nothing is happening
Mhm.
to me. And so I think perspective is a huge thing, right? And this idea that we have to be realistic about what we're doing. We have to be realistic about our own limitations. We also have to be willing to embrace our own gifts, right? Which is equally hard for people. Um, and to do all of that in a way that is just, I don't know, like I feel sometimes like we're not even really conscious of it, right? Like it's just, this is what I do, right? I would be doing this if I wasn't doing this, right? I mean, this is what we do. So I do think there's a certain character, right, that comes into play to do certain things, and working in intense situations is one of them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yes, I can be a minister at a deathbed. I could not be an EMT. You know, I couldn't handle that. So, I guess we pick our stresses. I don't know.
Yeah. I think there's a call element there. I think there's also there's something about spaces where everyone is just aware that something has gone awry that I think open up a space for candidness and truth. And that's what I find energy giving. Like it's and that's also a little bit in contrast with kind of traditional parish ministry for me is in a hospital room. Like no one here is pretending everything is okay for very long because we
Nope.
would not be meeting in this space if everyone's life was going the way we predicted it would. Um, I'm wondering if that's reflected in prison ministry and street ministry as well, and I wonder too if that's where some of that deeper connection and deeper joy comes from. Is like we're able to acknowledge what has been lost, which means that we're also able to, let the grief and the relationship all exist at the same time, as opposed to having to pretend everything is
And
fine.
you also made me think, and I promise we're going to acknowledge we have guests here in a minute again. But you made me think of this, that that idea that, like, I think one of the this is a little selfish, but look, there's something liberating about being in a room where everybody is just as broken as you are, right?
Absolutely.
Like, you don't have to put on pretenses there. I don't have to pretend to be, something that I'm not. Like, it is a place of real honesty, right? To be forced to confront yourself in a meaningful way. And so I think there is solidarity in brokenness, right? That I think ministers don't get to experience a lot because we're thought of as unbroken. Because
Mm.
people don't recognize that we're human sometimes, right? Or that we have these things. And so, yeah, I mean, what is the experience, right, of just being a broken person sitting among broken people?
Mm.
Well, no, I will definitely say, and we acknowledged the Welcome Church is an ELCA congregation. If I think if Lutherans are, famous for anything, it's returning to a basic, we're all sinners, we're all uh, beggars begging at the same table for bread. Um, the ability to, or the freeingness, yes, to not like um even internally have to pretend everything is okay, or that I have everything together, that I have come into my own, so to speak, which would be a, if that ever were an appearance, obviously it would not be a very deep facade, and maybe it's as see through as anything, but sometimes, we feel the need to pretend everything is all right or that we're perfect or whatnot. And the of people admitting they're, very much admitting that their own brokenness, um, is and in the context of saying that that's all of us is a very freeing thing. It's very freeing to acknowledge your own brokenness and that we all rely on forces outside of ourselves, and we're all more than our physical um, beings. We all rely on God is very freeing to release that facade for a moment.
Mhm.
Tigers is my first call.
Mm.
And I tell colleagues in ministry that they are ruining me for regular parish ministry. I think there's a reason that my predecessor is now a hospice chaplain and not in a parish context. But like the capacity to sit and argue about carpet colors, like
It's impossible
I'm
when
just
you
not going
yes, no.
when you get to sit in a room with people that are navigating the kind of challenges in life that they are navigating, and the privilege of sitting with them in that space, and the honesty and the vulnerability, the brokenness of it all is like, yeah, we're not going to pretend that we all have it together. um,
Mhm.
and it's a powerful gift. The mutuality there, you're right, is the gift to the minister in the space too. Is nobody is perfect, and I'm not either.
A
um
therapist told me once that ministry gave me a gift that is both a good thing and a bad thing, and that is that ministry gave me an absolute intolerance for bullshit. Um, because there's never time, right? I mean, like
Mhm.
it's not about all that stuff, right? I mean, I think probably one of the benefits of, one of the reasons I remain a hospice chaplain, because I did stop for a little while, but I had to get back into it, is because it keeps me focused on something that's not me, um,
Mhm.
the whole time, right? And I think Annika alluded to this earlier, right? It's the idea that it is the one thing I can say I do that feels selfless, right? That feels like I just do this because I need to help other people, right? Like it's just other person directed. Um, I think when you start to exist in that space, whether you're in a prison or a hospital or on the street, right, you start to realize that a lot of the stuff that you thought mattered doesn't matter. And it's about the mom who misses her kid because she can't see her, she's incarcerated, right? It's about the homeless person who's trying so hard, right, but just keeps falling down. It's about the person with the illness or the disability that needs support. It can't be about you, right? And it can't be about the color of carpet, right? It has to be about those things, right? And so it is a real lesson in focusing on important things quickly.
Yeah.
and I think I have to walk a line. I don't know how it is in Schaunel space, but in my space, like to to step into and acknowledge and own my pastoral authority in that space too, right? So I am
Yeah.
human, I am broken, but also people are looking to me for
Right.
a word of comfort, a word of hope, a word of whatever it might be. Um, and the words, because of the collar or the authority or the training or whatever, people are looking to me for that. And so I have to acknowledge that there is a space for me to offer that and to say that and to speak forgiveness and to speak hope, and plainly and clearly too, and not just wallow in our shared brokenness and our shared humanity, but to offer the gospel, um, and
So,
to own
Annika,
that, and then also to say like this is what this space is for, because particularly in a women's prison, I know we all go to church for different reasons. And a lot of times folks will come to church because that's the only time you can see someone that lives in a different living unit.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
and so those kinds of things can disrupt uh,
mm,
services if allowed to. Um, so, I don't want to be another person in their lives, yelling them and harping about rules or whatnot. So there's this, but there is this line, this balance of like, this is the space that we are trying to create here is too important to let this conflict or this squabble or whatever is happening here with this relationship drama
to overtake
disrupt
something for a bigger group. Yeah.
So yes, shared humanity, but also pastoral authority is a line that I am learning to walk, and it's been really helpful for some of the indigenous community there. By that I mean incarcerated folks, not necessarily native, but indigenous leaders. This is their community, to encourage me to step into that authority and to lead.
So, as I'm listening to this, and Annika, this is one of the reasons I really love doing this podcast, because I always come in with this preconceived notion about what we're going to be talking about, and then we end up having these incredible conversations, right, about self-care and all this other stuff. But I think the important thing what I want people to hear from you is this idea that I am so sick and tired of listening to how the church is dying. I'm so sick and tired of listening to how there's nobody cares anymore and there's no energy and the church is dead and blah blah blah. And these are vibrant ministries. Yes, maybe none of us can afford new cars, and maybe none of us can, and maybe we struggle a little bit, right? Because they're not exactly, mega church positions. But this is vibrant ministry, right? This is the church alive. And I think the reason we think the church is dead is because we stopped looking for it in places that weren't on the corners of the street in a giant building, right?
And so you're the places you're too scared to touch, the places that you're like, right? Oh, it must be depressing there. Well,
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the church is very much alive.
Yeah.
And it's doing the stuff Jesus kind of said to do.
Where Jesus was doing it.
Yeah. My challenge to many churches when I speak to people, I mean, where are the places in your community where there are people, like where people gather, and that's sort of it would obviously that needs a lot of fleshing out, like what people might be gathering, but where can you get outside your walls and meet people who aren't going to be, who probably aren't coming inside your walls
for whatever reason, for access reasons, for culture reasons.
Ever, either anytime soon or ever, and doing at least one of two things, building relationships with those people, and or the opportunities to experience worship and other aspects of spirituality with those people. I have been in churches, obviously, where you hear the sentence, we just need more people. And I will sort of be like, well, I know where I didn't understand that's what you wanted. I know where the people are. Outside. So I think it is sort of the challenge for our times for the Christian community of faith, to continue to get outside the walls and to build to see what call the church has outside of walls of traditional church buildings, building relationships with people, seeing what's going on among those communities, what strengths those communities have, and and what diversity of peoples are there, and and somewhat, where it seems to be that a community would be interested in such a thing, building a church in those contexts, as far as worship on in various outside the building places. I think that's the calling of our time, which I have said to many. We have folks come out and work with us, with the Welcome Church, and I'll say, but I will kind of be like, what's going on in your community? Like, what are the crossroads in any number of suburban towns and such around in different places?
Yeah.
Is there some place people can find you if they want more information?
Of course.
Email's great.
Yeah, do y'all have show notes or something you could link? Or
we can't. Yeah, if when we are off air, if you want to email those to me, that would be wonderful. And while we are on air, can you summarize what's the best way to reach out to Hagar's community and to the well?
So my email is hagars@olypres.org. And you could probably, if you Google us too, you'll find us pretty easily. Hagar's Community Church, Washington State. And we should, I don't know another Hagar's Community Church, but if you need it, we're in Washington, and you'll be able to find our website as
Nice.
well. We don't have our own domain. We're kind of nestled under our Presbytery's domain, so it's a little trickier to just give our URL.
So my email is rvschaunel@aol.com. The Welcome Church has a website, which is www.thewelcomechurch.org, and a Facebook page as well, which might be the Welcome Church in Philadelphia, some version of those words.
On Facebook and Instagram too. Yeah.
And I can confirm, if you go to that website, you will see a picture of the Reverend Schaunel Steinnagel in action as well.
Ooh, nice.
So many different ways, but probably email is a great way for me to connect with me, and I can tell anybody what's going on at any given moment with both the Welcome Church and the Well as the community of women.
Awesome. Thank you.
And on our website, you can sign up for our e-newsletter. We send out a couple times a month. And there's also a spot to give if you're feeling led to donate as well.
And Annika, what should people do if they are peacemakers themselves or no peacemakers?
Or no peacemakers? They should email us. If you would like to learn more about the organizations on this episode, please check out our show notes or email info@presbypeacefellowship.org. And if you consider yourself a peacemaker and would like to share a little bit about yourself, your work, and your story, email us at that same email address, info@presbypeacefellowship.org. We would love to hear from you. Deanna and Schaunel, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
And minister to minister, thank you for the solidarity of talking about work in an extra parish field. I got a lot out of this conversation, human to human, as well as host to host and host to guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. I love talking about the work that we get to do, and thanks for sharing it and telling the stories. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you so much.
Peace be with you.